Hello and welcome to Leadapreneur Online. We're looking at passionate people of the overall learning journey of how to lead. And we're looking at step 2, organizing your people. I just want to quickly touch on the fact of why I've labeled this passionate people rather than just people. It's not a cliche because it's about saying, oh, we have to be so passionate and yes, passion is so important and we're running around screaming our heads off. That's not what I mean. What I mean by passionate people is people who are very motivated, very excited, but also at the same time very focused. Simply having people is not enough to drive up performance. It has to be passion that powers performance. And one of the key things that leaders need to do is unlock that passion in people in order to drive high performance. So that's why it's passionate people, because that passion drives the search of excellence. So we're thinking now about why we need to organize people. Well, the key answer here is that structure determines behavior. The way that something is structured determines the way that it's going to behave. And a great example of this is how you organize carbon atoms. So carbon atoms are the same throughout the entire universe. There's no difference at all in any carbon atom here and in the next galaxy. But the way that you organize carbon atoms results in very different behaviors. So on the left we have graphite, which is carbon organized in one particular way. In the center we have coal, in which the carbon atoms are arranged differently. And then finally we have a diamond, which again is organized carbon atoms, but they're a different structure to the graphite and to the coal. And so it's really, really interesting to recognize that a lump of coal and a diamond are made of exactly the same substance. It is chemically identical. The only difference is the way that which those elements are organized. And in the same way, you can have exactly the same people, but by organizing them differently, you're going to get radically different behaviors. What matters for a leader is to find the right structure, the right way of organizing your people to get the behaviors that you need to be successful. And this is really obvious in a football team. A manager or a coach who is able to find the right structure for their team is able to unlock the performance of that team. So by enabling your people to be in the right structure, you enable them to work together effectively and win games and achieve the success that you desire. Why does this matter? Why do we want to focus on performance? Well, because we have to recognize what it is that leadership is really about. It's about building better results. And as Margaret Mead here says, better results and building a better world are really only achieved by groups of people working really, really well together. So the key question is, how do you organize that small team of people to work together effectively? And the second quote by Karl Popper becomes very important here, because most people are not aware of the leadership theories that they're using in order to organize their people. It's a bit like a manager who just uses the same way of organizing their football team because they don't know any other formations. And the reason that's a problem is because sometimes you need to change your formation to change the way the game is being played. And if you only use one formation all the time, you're not going to be successful continuously. What he's saying here is that you need to know about different leadership theories so that you can use the right theory for the right situation. And then finally, we have here what's a bit of a geeky quote, but I think it really summarizes perfectly what the 21st century leader is really about. The problem facing almost all leaders in the future will be how to develop their organization's social architecture so that it actually generates intellectual capital. So, what does that mean? Let me translate that for you. What it means is that the problem for leaders in the future, in other words, 21st century leaders, is how to focus on creating effective social architecture. Now, that's a big phrase for essentially saying how to develop great ways of organizing your people. If you think about architecture as being about the way that you design your house, social architecture is about how you organize the social relations between the people in your team. It's exactly the same concept. And then finally, intellectual capital is essentially intelligence. So to translate what this quote is saying, the challenge for 21st century leaders is to develop a way of organizing your people in such a way that you maximize their intelligence, but also enable their intelligence to grow rapidly and effectively. So the real challenge of the 21st century leader is to find a leadership structure, a way of organizing your team that maximizes intelligence. So what are we saying here? In short, leaders need to find the right social structures for their team. And it's your job as the leader to decide on the appropriate theory to match the team's capabilities and the situation. And then finally, you must make sure that you maintain and adapt the structure over time. That structure is always going to be changing. New people are going to be joining, people are going to be changing, the environment's going to be changing. You need to make sure that the the way that your team is organized suits the environment and maximizes performance rather than just simply doing the same old thing because you've always done it that way. So let's have a quick summary of where we are right now. Leadership theories are important because they describe how people are going to be organized. And as we've discussed, how people are organized determines the way that they're going to perform. Different theories have strengths and weaknesses. There is no one best theory. You have to be able to understand what the strengths and weaknesses are and match those theories to the situation. If you get that right, then you're going to have the right result. So, before we go into identifying some leadership theories, we need to understand a very, very important trade-off that happens with these different theories. And that's the trade-off between creativity and control. The more direct control that you want as a leader, the less creativity you allow your team to behave. In contrast, the less direct control you exert over the team, the more you enable creativity to flourish. So what do I mean by direct control? I mean by direct control, I mean someone who's a micromanager, who tells the people on their team to do exactly what they say. There's not allowed to have any independent thought or decision making. Someone who has high levels of direct control is almost standing over your shoulder with everything you do and instructing you what to do. Now that creates a very structured and ordered team environment, but obviously since you're not able to think for yourself, there are very low levels of creativity. What we have here is transactional, transformational, and complexity leadership theory. And in the next slide, we're going to look at what the strengths and weaknesses are of those theories. But what I really want you to be able to recognize here is there's a fundamental trade-off between high levels of control and high levels of creativity. You can't have both. So, we're looking at this idea of trying to maximize intellectual capital. As that quote from Ben has said, the real goal of the 21st century leader is to find a structure that enables you to maximize your team's intelligence. So let's look at three different theories that we have here. We have transactional leadership theory. And what that has is high levels of control and stability and structure, but very low levels of creativity. Another great advantage of this structure is that it's very fast and easy to set up. And let's think about the history of where this structure came from. It emerged through the Industrial Revolution. There was a need to organize the factories and the new places of work in which there was a boss who told people what to do, their managers, and those managers enforced the orders on behalf of their boss. The workers didn't get any say in the matter. They were simply told what to do, and they simply had to suck it up and get on with it. Now, that creates a very stable structure, but at the same time, as we can all clearly see, and we know perhaps from personal experience, these organizations structured in this way are very slow to change, and they're very limited in the amount of intelligence that they can deploy. This is because the only person who's really able to think in this whole organizational structure is the boss. The worker is not allowed to think, they have to follow the orders, and the manager simply has to follow their boss's orders as well. And the final problem with this structure, and perhaps actually the greatest problem of all, is creates a very meaningless work environment. The worker simply has to go in and do the same task over and over and over and over and over. You think I'm going to stop, but I'm not. Over and over and over and over and over again. Now, why did I emphasize it in that way? Because you probably got very bored of me repeating that just a few times now. But in the same way, imagine how bored and alienated and frustrated you're going to be doing the same simple mindless task over and over and... No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to keep going. Over again. And so that's one of the biggest challenges with the transactional leadership model, is it doesn't leverage the capabilities of the people at all. And so in response to that, in the latter half of the 20th century, transformational leadership theory came to the fore. And so the idea here was really to restructure the way that the organization operates. So rather than having just simply a boss sitting at the top of the hierarchy, you're focused more on having team leaders embedded within the people that they're working with. And you don't have workers who are your subordinates, you have colleagues and peers who you work together across sometimes very flat structures. Now, the goal here of this structure, and the reason it's called transformational leadership theory, is to enable the transformation of the individual through their work. So the idea here is that by empowering the people to make more decisions for themselves and work with their boss and collaborate with each other, you create a more meaningful work environment, and it allows the personal growth that we yearn for. And because people are more empowered to make decisions, you improve the decision-making capability of the team or organization. Because now now the team members are also allowed to make decisions, not just the boss. However, in practice, this theory faces a lot of problems. The first and foremost is that it's overwhelming for the team leader, because they're stuck between two roles. On the one hand, they are expected to perform the traditional role of the boss. They're still expected to do the majority of the decision-making and a lot of the micromanaging of the transactional leadership approach. And on the other hand, they're meant to be these super inspirational, super motivating leaders. And the tension between trying to do both really well is too much for some people. They simply just, not for some people, in fact for most people, they don't have enough time in the day. And further, they don't have the skills to do both. And so they're trying to do both and are usually not succeeding at doing either very well. The result is a very confusing work environment that's characterized by being very inauthentic. So even though there's an aspiration to create a meaningful workplace with highly engaged employees, the result of the structure means that is not going to be created. And the key question here, the key problem, is still the idea that the team leader has to be the decision maker. And every decision really has to be passed through the team leader. Even though you think that you're going to be empowered when you're making your decisions, you still have to check in with your boss all the time to make sure that it's okay. Now, to give an example of how slow this is, imagine a football team playing a match. And instead of playing normally, every time that player is thinking about passing the ball or thinking about running to a new place, they have to check with their captain or coach if they're allowed to do that or not. Now, obviously, this is going to be the worst football team in history because it's going to be so slow that the opposition are going to run rings around them and score so many goals while the other people are still working out if they're allowed to run to that next position or not. But, you might laugh, but this is how our teams are run today through the transactional and transformational leadership models. Every decision in the transactional leadership model and the majority of decisions in the transformational leadership model have to pass through the team leader. And it's that creates a vast decision-making bottleneck that really slows down the capability of the team and results in information overload for the team leader. And that's why complexity leadership is so attractive, because it offers a better solution. What happens here is that you take the leader out of the equation completely. So instead, the team organizes itself. And what the leader is focused on doing is directing the team through controlling the environment, influencing things such as the values and the culture of the organization or the team. And they're making sure that the people are providing one-to-one support and coaching and mentoring. What's overall crucial is that the leader is not directly embedded in the day-to-day decision-making. And what this enables is the team to make very rapid decisions. That ensures that the team is agile and can respond to change very quickly because they can talk amongst themselves and work out what to do without having to rely on their leader for everything. And in the same way, because you've removed that decision-making bottleneck, intelligence is maximized because people can work together very quickly to make decisions. And there's also great opportunity to create a meaningful work environment because the team is creating for itself its meaningful work environment, and that's being shaped by the leader versus the transformational approach in which the leader is expected to create the entire meaning themselves. So the complexity leadership approach is the fundamental platform for creating a high-performing team. But it's not perfect, and there are a lot of challenges with this model. It's very difficult to create and sustain. And then we're going to explore that a little bit later on, so I'm not going to talk too much about it now. So let's look at some examples of these three leadership theories. And the military is a fantastic place to see these in action. So the traditional military structure was that of the transactional leadership approach. The general was in charge and their orders were expected to be executed. And one great example of this approach is Hannibal engaging the armies of Rome at the Battle of Cannae. By flawlessly executing his plan, Hannibal achieved one of the greatest military victories in history, completely annihilating the Roman army. And this approach was used for centuries because it provided a very structured and ordered approach to what was otherwise a completely messy and uncertain situation. However, everything changed with Napoleon, in particular when Napoleon confronted the Prussian armies. In fact, Napoleon was at a place called Jena, and he believed he was engaging the main Prussian army at that place. However, the main Prussian army was at a place called Auerstadt, and that's where Napoleon's army only had a very small corps in place. However, that small French corps engaged the entire Prussian army and managed to win a stunning victory. So stunning, in fact, that when Napoleon found out about the victory, he couldn't believe it and sent his messenger back in disbelief, saying, "It's impossible for you to have defeated such a large force." When it turned out that the French indeed had won the battle, there were incredible celebrations, and people asked themselves why. What's important to understand is that Prussia was a military powerhouse. Their army was one of the most respected and feared in Europe. How had a small French corps managed to take out one of the largest and most powerful armies in Europe, and indeed the whole world? One of the keys was the decision-making capability of that army. What's important to recognize is that Napoleon had shifted from the transactional leadership model to the transformational leadership model. In other words, He empowered his commanding officers to make decisions for themselves. Whereas the Prussian army was very powerful in terms of its troops, its decision-making structure was still based on the transactional approach. All decisions had to be routed through high command and the king himself. And what that meant is that while the Prussians were still organizing themselves and trying to work out what they were trying to do, as messages were flying back and forth between the generals and the army, the small French corps were able to completely outmaneuver the Prussian army and inflict a stunning blow that led to the retreat of the overall army. And this is the genius of Napoleon, because he actually was not present at the Battle of Auerstadt, nor were any of his direct commands involved in the victory at Auerstadt. His genius was to be able to empower his generals through the transformational leadership model to think for themselves and to go forward and carry out the spirit of his orders, not wait for the letter of his orders. And then complexity leadership is something that's being pioneered particularly by the US military today. Modern situations require instantaneous and fast responses, and not everything can be routed by the superior officer. That means that soldiers need to think on their feet, and the effective commanding officers will work to create an effective environment in which soldiers are guided by their strong sense of values and understanding of military doctrine and strategy in order to achieve the results, rather than trying to wait for their superior officer to command them what to do all the time. It's important to recognize here that there's always a need for the leader, but what that leader's role is changes. Whereas in the transactional approach, the leader is essentially bossing everyone around and telling them exactly what to do, the more sophisticated version of complexity leadership has the leader creating a superior environment which unlocks the creative capability of the team. The leader is still in charge and is still responsible, but the way in which they unleash the capability of their team to deliver results is very different. And that's why we're going to have a little bit of a look at complexity leadership now. So the reason why complexity leadership is so important for the 21st century leader is very simple. The 21st century can be characterized in one simple sentence. It's a world that is accelerating, it's more complex, it's more uncertain, and it's more volatile. That means that to keep up, you need to accelerate your own decision making, otherwise you're going to fall behind. But the problem is you can't simply carefully lay plans because you have no idea what's going to happen in the next 6 months, let alone the next 6 years. Further, change is not gradual. It's very volatile. Really big shifts can happen very quickly. For example, the financial crisis has completely transformed the growth models of the Western economy. And if you've been making your plans in 2005, you definitely would not have expected the situation that is present today. So what you need is a model that enables your team to be agile and respond quickly, and complexity leadership enables that. Its great advantage is that it enables maximum intelligence to respond quickly and effectively to the rapidly changing world. However, it is very challenging to set up and requires highly effective leaders. And the good way of understanding how to set up complexity leadership is in the equation above. Complexity leadership is a factor of environment, human capital, and social capital. So what does this mean? The leader needs to focus on 3 things. The leader needs to focus on creating a highly effective work environment for their people. They need to ensure that those people are the most competent that they can be. And then finally, social capital is something that we intuitively understand, but only recently is coming into leadership theory and other aspects of society. And what it refers to is how socially connected the people are to each other. The more socially connected people are to each other, the more willing they are to communicate, exchange information, collaborate, and co-create. Highly connected people are highly effective at communicating and working together to build solutions. People who are disconnected and working in silos and not communicating with each other are not as effective as people who are highly connected. So what is the task of the 21st century leader? Your task is to maximize these 3 factors. You can see that having really great people who are really connected together, human capital times social capital, creates a very powerful multiplier. And then when you combine great people who are highly connected together in a great operating environment, then you are maximizing the leadership the intelligence of your team. And that's what the diagram represents, with the circle around the team. The leader is nurturing the environment, is nurturing the individuals, and is nurturing the relationships between the individuals in order to maximize the capability of the team. So if you ask me, what does a 21st century leader need to do? What does the ideal 21st century leader look like? For me, they're someone who is able to perform complexity leadership theory. They are focused on developing high quality environments, developing the best out of their people, and investing in nurturing and sustaining high levels of social capital in their team and organization. So let's move a little bit away from theory and focus on some practical advice. First of all, there is no right leadership theory. in terms of being perfect. There's only the right leadership theory for the right situation. Your job as a leader is to make sure you match the leadership theory to the right environment. Don't simply try and enforce complexity leadership if you don't have the skills for it, or there isn't the time to set it up, or you don't have the people or environment which are appropriate for that kind of leadership. You must use your judgment to find the right theory for the right situation. Secondly, don't decide it alone. Talk with your people. You're not a lonely hero on the mountaintop, far away from your people's needs. You need to be embedded with your people and talk to them. People will work with you to work with what's most effective. Some teams and situations will require more of a transactional approach. They simply want you to come in, organize them, and let them get on with it. But other situations will require a complexity leadership approach. So find a way of talking to your people and ask them what they think is most appropriate. And then finally, allow the structure to change and adapt. Whatever you decide on, be practical about it, adapt it to the local situation, and move with the changing environment. So in summary, your leadership theory determines how you organize your people. And as we discussed, the way that those people are organized will determine the way that they behave and perform. Your task is to find the right theory to match the right situation. Use your judgment to adapt to the environment, and don't simply do the same old thing. Make sure that you're in tune with what the environment requires and that you're matching the right leadership theory. By finding the right theory, you can drive excellent performance and achieve your success as a leader.